And I have this really nice, I want to say it's like a terry knit. It's very similar to a sweatsuiting kind of fabric, soft, and you can see the ribbing on the back. Make sure you have all your pieces cut out, have them marked really well, and I'll meet you at the machine. Okay, the first thing we're gonna do is prepare the pocket, and this is pattern piece number 5. I've already set my length, so you're just gonna take it and mark how far away from the line. So I've done that. Okay, I have a long stitch, but I'm just gonna mark the depth of this. And I finished off my raw edge, but you don't have to do that. I just like everything to look really neat. It's knit, so it won't unravel, so you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Okay, with the fabric right side facing up, you're just gonna fold the upper edge of the pocket back along the fold line, and the longest edge, the long edge, you're going to pin. Okay, now you're gonna sew the seam allowance 5/8 inch all the way around the outer side, not this short side. Okay, now you're going to stitch in 5/8 inch all the way around. Okay, so now you are going to trim the facing area to within 1/4 of the edge of the seam and the inside here. And you're gonna see that I have the thread still hanging. Do not cut those. You want to leave that hanging there. Okay, we're going to use that. So now you're going to turn to the inside and you're going to iron these edges here. Turn them all in and iron your edges down. When you are ironing, make sure that you iron along where that stitching line is. So you're gonna press right along where this fold line is. Okay, so this is what your pocket should look like once you've pressed it, okay? I don't leave my edges like this because they tend to poke out on the side. So I'll open up my seam or my edges, and then I just fold in right at the point, and then I press it again. Then I mark where I want to put my top stitching on my pocket, so I know that it has to catch in this edge. So I'm gonna mark here, okay? So I'm gonna place the stop here, and then I'm just gonna turn over and I'm gonna come back and stitch here. And then you're going to come in 1/4 centimeter away, and you're going to do another top stitch. And if you feel the need to pin it, please feel free to do that. Now you're going to pull out those threads. Remember those threads that marked the fold of your pocket? You're just going to pull them out. And then I'm going to press everything again so it looks nice and neat. Okay, now you're going to take your front piece, number 6, and you see I've shortened mine by about an inch or so because I'm just barely 5'4", and I needed to shorten it. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have my pocket lines already transferred onto the pattern piece, so we're going to pin the pockets onto the front piece. Okay, you can see my pocket placement line, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin along the placement line. Okay. So I'm going to stitch the edge here, and then I'm going to baste this edge together. Okay, so you want to take your front piece and lay it on a nice big flat surface so that you can see the pattern marking and place your pockets exactly nice and straight and how it should look. So you're going to notice in your pockets that you have a little pucker here. Your pocket should not be flat. If it is, that means you didn't place on the correct spot for your pocket placement. So now we're going to stitch on the edges, and then we're going to baste on the side. Okay, we have a long loose stitch here for our basting. We're going to stop right on this edge here, pivot, and we're going to switch to a regular stitch length. And you don't want your fabric to stretch because this is knit, so you want it to be nice and smooth. So don't allow it to stretch or hang as you're sewing it. And you're stitching on the edge. We're going to do this all the way around, pivoting at the corner and ending at the top, back stitching at the end. Okay, this is what your pocket should look like. Okay, nice clean stitching. You've got your top stitching here for the pocket edge, and you want to check your placement, make sure everything is even. Now we can move on. Okay, now we have piece 2, the back, and you see I've shortened it the same amount as I did for the front. So we're going to take this and we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to stitch the back seam in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, now you've pinned your back seam, so we're going to go ahead and stitch that. Okay, so we've stitched the whole back seam. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to serge the ends, and I'm going to press open. Okay, and then we're going to sew or attach the front to the back. Okay, here's our back seam, serged and pressed flat. Okay, so we have our front pinned to our back, and we're going to stitch the sides in your standard 5/8 inch. You're going to do both sides. Okay, I'm not going to serge and press open my seams for the sides, but I am going to serge them as one, and then I'm going to press them both towards the back. Okay, so go ahead and do this is the side seam. So this is the front and this is the back. So I've serged and pressed my seam towards the back on both sides. Now we're gonna get our sleeve. Okay, so now we have our sleeve, it's piece 3. And the first thing we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to make our dart, okay? So you're gonna take this pattern piece apart. I always mark on the inside. So you'll see my dart markings. Okay, to make my dart, I find my point, which is here, and then my point here, and I usually just put my finger in the middle, and then I fold it along that point, so both the points, okay? Now, I make my line really faint, but I can see it. You might not be able to see it well. And then I take long pins, and I start here. Make sure that everything is lined up. I put it through and I look and I make sure it's going, and it usually is pretty much right on the same spot. Okay, if you fold it good, you'll get it every time. Then when I sew, I'm gonna sew and follow my marking all the way out to the end. Do not backstitch. Come to a very narrow point and then just sew right off the fabric, okay? Another way you can make your dart, you can make the marking and then you can sew on the marking and then fold it and then pin, okay? But I've done this so many times, I really don't need to do that. But that's another option. So go ahead and pin your dart. Okay, so I have my dart pinned, and then I put a pin here to show where to stop. So I'm gonna sew starting right on top of where my pin is, because that's exactly where my stitching line, the marking is. Take my pin out, and then I'm just going to sew. And I see that it's coming to a narrow end, and I usually slow down and come off right at the pin. Okay. Then you're going to take those threads, and I just like knot them. Okay, so I just take the thread, and then I'm just gonna tie a double knot. Maybe one more time. And I'm trimming it, okay? And then you're gonna press to the back. Okay, I just check my darts for the same thickness and that they end at the same points. And then I'm gonna press them towards the back. Okay, now we're going to pin our underarm seam. My dog wants to go out. So we're going to pin both underarm seams. We're going to stitch in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to serge the seams together and press towards the back. You can serge individually or just press open. Since this is knit, it won't fray. You don't have to serge it. We have to press up our hem on our sleeve. So we're gonna take a look at the pattern piece. The hem allowance is 1 1/4 inch. So we're gonna mark 1 1/4 inch for our hem, okay? Okay, to mark my 1 1/4 inch hem allowance, I've got my guide here, and I'm just going to do a basting stitch or a very loose stitch, and I'm going to mark where I need to fold the hem over. Make sure that your fabric is not underneath what you're sewing. You don't want to attach it. And make sure, since knit rolls, that you keep smoothing out the edge to keep it right up against the guide so you can get a perfect 1 1/4 inch hem allowance. So you do this all the way around, making sure that the fabric stays straight the whole way. Okay, before I turn up my hem, trim off those loose threads very close to the fabric. On the other side, you have the longer threads. You don't want to trim those, leave those, okay? So I'm not going to finish the raw edges of this knit. It's not going to unravel, and I want it to have as much stretch as possible. But I am going to take the very edge of my fabric, and I'm going to apply, this is called Wash Away Wonder Tape, and I use it, I've been using it for years, and you're going to apply this Wonder Tape all around the sleeve on the edge. Press it down firmly, and then you're going to peel it away. If you don't have this, that's fine. You're still just going to follow the next step of folding the hem up and then stitching it, okay? But this just gets a nice, more stable and even stitch. So we'll do this to both sleeves and then fold the hem up and pin. Okay, so now you're going to make sure that your seam is still facing towards the back, and you're just going to fold down along where your stitching is, where you put your 1 1/4 mark. I'm just going to fold it down like that and pin all the way around. Okay, so you're just going to fold right on that line of the mark, smooth everything out, and pin. And do this all the way around. Okay, so this is what your sleeve should look like. Nice and smooth. You can pin in the Wonder Tape. It will not gum up your needle. And then you have this thread hanging. We're going to stitch in a straight stretch stitch all the way around. Okay, I moved my pins to the outside, and I'm going to stitch on the top, so on the right side of the fabric. I've placed my guide exactly where I want it to be so that my stitch will be the same exact depth or width the whole way around both sleeves, okay? So I'm doing a stretch stitch here, a very narrow one. Make sure to keep your fabric nice and smooth. Keep the pins out of the way, and also the fabric on the underside of the sleeve out of the way. Okay, so this is what your sleeve will look like. Nice and smooth. The stitching looks really good, and you still have these long threads hanging out. So you want to make sure that take one side of the thread and you're going to pull it and then just pull it out, okay? And then press your sleeve. Okay, so after you've pressed your sleeve, you'll notice everything is nice and flat. I did not serge the inside, and this depth was 1 1/4 per the instructions on the pattern, but then I marked 1 inch so that when I top stitched, it's 1 inch from there. Now you could do like 1 1/8, it doesn't really matter. I just chose 1 inch. Okay, so now we're gonna attach the sleeves to the body of the dress. Okay, so now we are going to attach our sleeves. I got my 5/8 inch. I'm doing a triple stretch stitch. It's just a really reinforcing type of stitch. So I'm gonna do that for this armhole. We're gonna do both of our sleeves this way. Okay, and then after you finish this, you're going to just serge. Now, if you don't have a serger, that's fine. This is knit, so it's not gonna unravel anyway. I would just take some pinking shears and I would just trim down all my seams. Okay, now we're gonna work on the neck. So we're gonna take piece 7, the neckband, and we are going to, now you should make sure that your neckband is marked. You have your markings, so my markings are very faint, but you can see them. And you're going to fold it right sides together. So I'm gonna get my right sides. I'm gonna pin the center back seam of the neckline. I'm gonna stitch that. Okay, now I wanna check and see what the seam allowance is, because sometimes necklines are less, they're like a 3/8 inch, so let me just check. Okay, so we're gonna sew this in a 5/8 inch, but we are going to sew when we attach it to the neckline at a 3/8 inch. So I've got my 5/8 inch here, and let me just adjust my seam width. Okay, so we're gonna sew the back seam of the neckband, and I'm just sewing a straight stitch. Okay, so we're gonna press this open. We're gonna press this open, and then we're going to fold the neckband in half and then pin it all the way around. Okay, so I folded my neckline in half and I've pinned it, and you'll notice that I've used little pins this time because we have a small strip of fabric here, and these are ballpoint pins. So we're gonna go ahead and place the back seam on the back of the dress, and I'm already loving how this dress is turning out. It's exactly how I envisioned it, so I'm really excited because the reviews of this dress were not good, but you can't let everyone else's results deter you, because for some reason, sometimes the masses will say something isn't good, and then I don't know why, but I guess God has blessed me and I'll make something and it turns out amazing. So I think this will be one of those times. So we're gonna go ahead and find our notches, match them up on our dress, pin them, and then we have marks for the shoulder seam. This is the front seam actually. And we're gonna make sure that we keep our seams turned in, okay? So always check your seams. If you have them pressed forward, then keep them forward, backward, keep them backward, whatever. But usually it's back. So I'm gonna go ahead and find those and pin them down. And then you're gonna have to go back and you're gonna kind of stretch to fit in those spaces where it's a little snug because it's knit, and you want your neckline to be kind of gathered in or fitted in closer. So you wanna stretch to fit everything. So you're gonna pin that down. So you're gonna do that all the way around your neck. So we have my last piece. I'm gonna stretch, smooth everything out, stretching to fit. Sometimes I'll use my hand to hold the fabric down, stretch it, and then pin. Okay, so you want to make sure everything is kind of eased in equally and everything is where the markings, placed where the markings are. So I'm going to start with my back neck seam, and this calls for a 3/8 of an inch. Just make sure everything is nice and flat. I'm going to mark my 3/8. Okay, and we're going to stitch the neck. I am going to do this in a narrow stretch stitch, so really narrow zigzag. Okay. And you're pulling to stretch while you're sewing all the way around, making sure everything stays nice and smooth. Okay, so we have our neckline. We've just finished stitching and it looks really good. Everything is lined up really well. So I'm gonna serge now the raw edge here and clean it up. And then I'm going to press it down. I'm gonna iron it and press it down because we're gonna come back and we're gonna top stitch, or we're gonna stitch on top of the fabric to kind of finish off the neckline, okay? If you do not have a serger, just use your pinking shears and press down. Okay, so we've pressed our neckline down, so this is what it should look like, flat, nice and smooth. And we're going to do a straight stretch stitch or just a very narrow stretch stitch, okay? So you want to make sure that you stay the same width all the way around. And I'm starting at the back seam again. Make sure you're keeping your seam hems or edges all the way down, pressed down. You want to catch them as you're sewing. Okay, here's our finished neckline. Everything is done, and you can see that it's like a boat, kind of a low boat cut neckline. So now we need to do the final step, which is our hem. And on the pattern piece, it tells us that we are to do a 1 1/4 inch hem, just exactly like our sleeve. So I'm gonna go ahead again, make a loose stitch. I'm gonna mark up with the stitch 1 1/4. I'm gonna fold it in and pin it. And then on the top side, I'm gonna top stitch, and I'm gonna do this with a straight stitch. I'm not doing this with a straight stretch stitch. I'm not worried about the stretch in this because this is not a fitted to the body kind of dress, and it's very, you know, loose towards the bottom. So there's really no need for any extra stretch or give.